everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The Drop Point. Before we get started today, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so that way you don't miss any of our episodes. And if you find any value in what we're saying, then don't forget to share with anyone that you think would be interested. Today, we've got Jeff Thompson with us from Propane Resources. Jeff's the guy who spends his days helping propane companies make sense of supply training, risk, and all the fun market curveballs that get thrown our way. And we're excited to dig into what makes a good supply partner, how to plan ahead, and maybe even get a peek at what's coming down the road in the propane market. So, Jeff, thanks for joining us today. Do you want to give us a quick intro?
So I started in the industry in the late 90s. I was a capital asset, fixed asset accountant for Southwestern Bell. Prior to that, in the 90s, I worked for a subcontractor for the RTC, and you got to be really old to know what the RTC is, but it was the Resolution Trust Corporation. And when the SNLs had issues with financing loans and those types of things, the federal government had to come in and basically bail out the whole system. So I worked for a subcontractor for the RTC, which then in turn led me into working as a fixed asset accountant, capital asset accountant for Southwestern Bell, which is now AT&T. And I worked for their cellular division of Southwestern Bell in the 90s. Mid 90s, late 90s, I started to think I wanted to do something that was a little more exciting and a little different. And I wanted to find a small operation versus a Fortune 500 to work for. So started digging around and was introduced to Propane Resources and the founder of Propane Resources, Dwayne Willingham and Marty Laram. And that would have been late 97, and came on board with them and have been doing propane ever since. So haven't left. Same company.
That's it. That's awesome.
Haven't left.
That's one of the things about this industry. Once you get in it, like you're in it, you'll know right away if it's for you or not. But for guys like I've been doing this since 96, Justin's been doing this from 2000. Like you just find that this is just a great career field because it's so various. You have so many different options in front of you. So appreciate that. So how has the propane industry changed since you first got started?
It's still a very hands-on, very integrated group of people. I mean, one of the things I find fascinating about the propane industry is that we all like each other. You can be a competitor in the sense that, somebody may be doing the same exact job or function you do for a different company, but we all get along and we all like each other. And when things get rough, we all help each other get through the rough patches, which is, you just don't find that in your typical, what I came out of telecommunications, it was cutthroat. They did everything they could to eliminate their competition. Propane doesn't operate that way. So to say things have changed, I think that the changes of, course, the computer systems, the efficiencies that have developed over the past, 20 years, 25 years, as the younger generations are coming in and telling mom and dad, hey, we don't have to use paper ledgers anymore. We can actually use Excel spreadsheets. And so those types of things have changed. But I think the community and the feel of the industry haven't changed, which is a wonderful thing. I always gripe and complain that the industry isn't as efficient as it could be, but it's a recognition that it's also more of a niche market, niche industry. And so, some of the functionality that you could get in, a different industry or a larger industry, well, those developments aren't going to happen here as fast because there's just not that much of a market overall for an Oracle to come in and build some type of database system that could really create tremendous efficiencies because they're not going to get a return on the investment. So I would tell you, the change is more on the backside with computers, telecommunications, smartphones, speeding up that capacity to get bills of lading from terminals to the bobtail driver being able to drop off a ticket and the consumer within 5 minutes pay that bill. Where in the old days, you mailed a check and 10 days later it cleared and you got your money. So that's probably the biggest one I've seen.
Okay. So just to kind of follow up on that, in terms of a propane company purchasing supply, how has automation affected that process? Or are there new tools that are out there for you to help determine what's the right path for a company?
From a supply point of view, that's probably one of our greatest deficiencies is that, in the old days when I first started, you called up a trader. Okay, what's the market look like for the wintertime? And then he tell you, then you got to call the retailer. And then and instead of, now I send out an email or I send out a mass text and I can touch, 20 or 30 companies within a minute. Back in the day, you spent your whole day on the phone calling
Right.
folks and saying, hey, this is what the market looks like. This is what we're seeing. And we still do that. We still get on the phone and we still talk because of that relationship. And you want to continue that relationship. And it gets back to what I said previously. We're a likable group of people. We all like to talk to each other. So I don't ever want to see that part of it go away, because that's one of the reasons I stay in the industry, is that we all do like each other. We all enjoy talking to each other. But the efficiencies are, instead of me having to talk to 20 people a day about December price is this, now it's, hey, how you building your marketing plan? How you, and so really what the efficiency is now we're seeing a situation where, okay, I know what the price is. As a retailer, I can say, okay, I know what the price is. But now you can talk to a Jeff or you can talk to somebody like me and say, how should I be building out my supply plan? What should I look like this winter, as opposed to just selling a price on a gallon? So that's been enjoyable to see as time has passed.
So what drew you into Propane Resources on the supply side of the business?
I've always had a fascination with commodities and markets. Goes back to when I was a little kid. My neighbor was a banker, and I cut his grass. And this is going to tell you how old I am, so be careful. But back in the 70s, a kid, how you made money is you cut your neighbor's grass. That's what you did. And so, and you'd make $2 or $3, and he lived right next door, and I'd cut his grass. And, I'm like 8, 9, 10 years old, whatever, 11 years old. And I'd go knock on his door and he'd invite me in. I'd sit in the living room. Well, back in the day, before internet, they mailed you the Wall Street Journal. And so as a banker, he was getting a copy of the Wall Street Journal. And I would sit there and I would read the commodity section, the trading section. So I would look at what corn was doing or what soybean was doing or whatever. At that age, I didn't know what propane was. So I won't say I was looking at the propane market, but, but I looked at all the different ag markets, and just, it always fascinated me because, this market, propane, as well as, the other commodity markets are they're pure markets. It's, they indicate what's really happening in the world. So I've always had that fascination with the markets. And as I got older and went through school and, got the accounting degree and went into Southwestern Bell, it never went away. But then when this opportunity presented itself, I said, I think I'm home. I found it. And so I haven't looked back.
So you've been a trader since you were a kid mowing yards.
I wish. Well, the funny thing is that my banker neighbor, probably if I'd pushed it, he probably would have helped me trade something, small, maybe, but no, always trying to figure out what makes things move and why does it move.
So Justin, you want to take over for the next section of questions?
All right, so for market dynamics and risk, exports versus domestic needs, with U.S. exports high, how do you advise retailers to balance between securing supply and reacting to shifting export pressures?
Well, right now, I tell people most of the time, PAD 3, which is the Gulf Coast marketplace, that's really an export market. And that's what it's really set up for. Propane, without the export market, propane, we would be so long in this country. The natural gas liquids that we produce now, because of what we've done in the natural gas world and fracking, we would have more than an excess. We would be in trouble. What do we do with this? PAD 3 has now become just an export market. That's the focus. It's Bellevue's goal is, where do we take, butane, ethane, propane, natural gas that's an LNG. Where are we going to move those around the world? The domestic market is more reflective in PAD 2, which is the Midwest. That to me is more of the domestic consumption market. That's a greater indicator of kind of what's going on. So when I talk to retailers, I really talk to them, and it kind of gets back to what we talked a few moments about, is that, in the old days, you talk price and you talked inventories, and you still do, but that's what you really focused on. now the focus is more of, okay, we know what the price is because I can get the price 10 seconds from a trader and I could send it to you. So the price really, I don't want to say it's not important. It is. It's a function of the overall discussion. The real discussion now to have with retailers is how are you selling this to your customer? That's the discussion. And, and most, I don't want to say most supply guys, but supply guys, we're conditioned that we stay in our own little world. And the one thing that was refreshing when I came on with Propane Resources in the late 90s and was heavily encouraged is help marketers market better to their customers. So supply, I don't look at supply as the function. Supply assists marketing. That's what it does. Because without knowing how that retailer is going to market, it's hard to build a supply plan to fit it. So how many gallons are you selling on a fixed price? How many gallons are you selling on a budget? And some of the best marketers I've met over the years are guys who come out with one marketing plan. They send out a letter and they tell their customer base, this is the price. That's it. That's their marketing plan in the sense of, they're not trying to always negotiate with their customer base. And then what that does is it frees them up to go do the important things, which is service the customer instead of sitting there trying to answer the phone all day long and trying to negotiate for a penny or a nickel or whatever. So the dynamics really is we have to have from a supply point of view, we have to have an awareness that they're going to push as much propane out of the country as they can. And what that does is that puts PADD 2 in a situation that if we have any type of domestic consumption, PADD 2 Conway pricing has to go up high enough to create the incentive for them to keep the Gulf Coast market in the United States. Okay. So that I'm always talking to retailers is build the plan. And that's why I'm emphasizing marketing. Build your marketing plan. What's your budget? What do you need for a gross margin? Know what that number is. Don't guess it. Know what that number is. If you know your bobtail expenses are 35 cents or 40 cents, your office admin's 10 or 15 cents. Okay, you're already at 50 cents that you got to make at the least. And now you haven't even made any money, but that's at the least you got to make that. So what do you want to put to the bottom line? Okay, now that we know that number, okay, now we can start matching up. Where's Conway or where's Bellevue? And we can start matching up that supply plan to make sure you hit your budgeted gross margin. You cover your fixed sales, you cover your budgeted price, you cover any type of price caps, make sure you're covered. Covered. Done. Don't play with it. Don't mess around with it. Make sure you got that margin covered. Now, the remainder is what can we do to put you in the best situation to create the best opportunity to maximize your gross margin? So when you start and you look at, and then that's when you start incorporating where inventory levels. What does crop drying look like this year? What does winter weather look like this year? Right now, if you look at the models, crop drying is going to be real hit and miss. In fact, I was talking to a guy earlier today. He goes, when corn's under $4 a bushel, it's hard to justify drying corn. Okay. So, and then I've heard other guys say, their farmers are telling them they're not going to cut until much later into the fourth quarter. Okay. Why? They're going to let it dry down in the field. So crop drying is going to be a hit and miss. There'll be some, but probably not anything outstanding. Okay. Well, you look at the European weather models, and the European weather models generally are better longer term indicators than the US models and the Canadian models. The Canadian models, I always joke, they're not bad, but the Canadian models always run cold. Okay. And I think it's just because they're from Canada, but they run their models and they always seem to be cold. The European model is showing that we're not going to have much of a winter. There's a window from December through January where temperatures normalize. And we got that 4 to 6 week window, maybe. That's when you could see that Bellevue Conway supply dynamic come into play, because Conway's going to have to get high enough to keep Bellevue coming in and staying in the United States. If it never gets there, they're just going to keep pushing gallons out as fast as they can out of the Gulf Coast.
It makes sense. Goes to the highest bidder, right?
Yep, that's right. That's right. It's arbitrage. So if the Asians are willing to pay more, it's going over there. So you have to create, because they've got contracts with these guys, and they got contracts with the Europeans, and they got contracts with South Americans, but you have to create enough incentive for them to keep their gallons that they bought here in Bellevue in the United States and then go find gallons to replace for those contracts somewhere else overseas. And so if we never get to that point, they're just going to keep pushing gallons out the door in the Gulf Coast.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. So with that being said, that's kind of a good lead in on that. So tariffs and global risks. So how are things like tariffs or geopolitical shifts, like conflicts or export bans, influencing domestic propane pricing and supply like today?
Tariffs actually could have a negative impact on propane prices, negative in the sense they go down, which from a retailer's point of view could be a positive impact because their wholesale costs go down. But the tariff situation, if you ever got any type of retaliatory tariff war with like a China, and China is a prime example because China imports a tremendous amount of our natural gas liquids and a tremendous amount of our ethane. And if we think we have a problem on the propane side, China stops importing ethane, we've got a huge problem because we create more ethane than we do propane. So a tariff situation when we get into a war would be that you would actually see a glut of natural gas liquids start to come back into the United States, and that would drive the price down. So from a retailer's point of view, it wouldn't necessarily be a horrible thing, but then what happens is you start getting into the economics of production, because they got to have a place to store it. And as you guys know, they store the stuff underground in salt caverns. Okay. You start running out of space, well, now you're going to have to start pulling back on well production, natural gas well production. Then that's going to impact, the whole natural gas stream. You get into a situation where we better find out where we can move this stuff or the production stops. So from a tariff point of view, I won't get into the politics of whether tariffs are right or wrong, but if you got any type of retaliation on a tariff, it would probably drive prices down because all that NGL product would stay in the U.S. A perspective of exports are never going away. They're never here to stay until we get to the point where we get past all the fracking and all the natural gas extraction we have in the United States. And that probably won't be in my career, but we're going to have, because enterprise doesn't spend billions of dollars expanding export facilities to mothball. So they've set this whole system up on the Gulf Coast to export, to move as much as they can out of the country. And so that's just going to continue. So of course, then those folks, they have money and the capacity to lobby Congress, the capacity to lobby the administration. Don't put retaliatory tariffs or don't put damaging tariffs on this. And if you looked here in the past handful of weeks when China and the U.S. were kind of, punching on each other a little bit about it, they actually, kind of tried to claw out the natural gas liquids out of that whole tariff argument or discussion because it benefited the Chinese to continue to get it and it benefited us to get rid of it. So,
Perfect. All right. How about stress testing supply systems? So like in your view, what's the number one vulnerability in most supplier systems? And how can marketers stress test their supply chains now?
I tell you, the vulnerability is we need propane the most for 3 or 4 weeks out of the year. We're in that environment in this country where propane, most of the time, the terminals work, the trucks work, everything flows the way it's supposed to flow. And about 3 or 4 weeks out of the year, 5 weeks out of the year, the wheels come off and everybody's scrambling trying to get propane. And trying to get propane today, not tomorrow. I think the overall weakness in the supply chain is transportation people will tell you it's the terminals and supply people will tell you it's transportation. I'll tell you, I believe it's transportation. And not because they don't do the job, they do a great job. The problem is we can't convince the younger generation that this is a great career. Okay. We're really struggling convincing the 20-somethings that running 9,000 gallons of propane to a propane retailer is a good career. And we haven't figured that out. And if you look across the industry, all these transportation companies are doing everything they can to do as much as they can, but their drivers are 55, 60, 65, 70 years old. They're getting older. Now you trying to convince that 25-year-old, hey, this is a great job. Well, he may not like the idea of pulling hoses at 2 a.m. Somehow, some way, our industry needs to convince these kids this is a fairly recession-proof industry. It's a great industry. It's a friendly industry. We all get along. We all like each other, and you can make a decent living. And so for me, if there's a stress in the system, the stress is that transportation companies can't find the folks to run the trucks that they need to run. In addition to that, and this is no fault of the transportation industry, is because we only have this really peak demand of 5 to 6 weeks, how does a transportation company justify $400,000 for a cab and another $200,000 for a trailer when they're going to get peak performance out of it for 6 weeks, tops, and then they're trying to figure out for the next 40 weeks, 45 weeks, what do I do with this? And so I don't have the answer. If I had the answer, we would be there. I don't know what that answer is, but that to me is the stress in the system. So for a propane retailer, the stress test on their system is do I have a great relationship with the transport company? Do I have a great relationship with my suppliers? Do I have multiple supply points? Does my transporter go to the multiple supply points? Do I need to bring on a second transportation company to basically back in to make sure I can get that load of propane when my bulk is running on empty for that 3 or 4 weeks? And then on top of it, from a retailer's point of view, that retailer has to look at his overall demand annually and say, okay, you know what? I'm going to do 300, 400,000 gallons in the month of January. Rule of thumb when I came into the business was a retailer needs to have about 3 weeks of bulk peak demand and bulk storage. So in that environment, okay, if you're doing like 400,000 peak January, peak February, do you have 250, 300,000 gallons of bulk storage? Okay. Well, you guys know as well as I do what bulk storage is costing now. Okay. So then you have the whole conversation with the retailers. How do I justify this? What's my return on my investment? And then you got the whole issue of families and legacies of the retailers. Dad's getting to be my age and the kids aren't necessarily so excited to come into the industry. I wish they would, but a lot of the families, the younger folks don't want to come into the industry. And we need to figure out a way to convince these kids what a great business this is. Right. And we struggle collectively, I think, as an industry to get that message across. But so dad's going to go drop hundreds of thousands of dollars and maybe not get the return on the investment when either his health or his wife tells him, hey, I want to start, relaxing a little bit, So there's so many things that are just kind of bubbling in the industry right now. And from a supply point of view, it's you got to make sure you have enough bulk storage, but you don't want too much, because if you have too much, you're not getting the return on the investment. But if you have too little, now you've let your customer base down that you built this marketing plan and told them you could do all these great things for them, and you're not delivering. Well, there's the kiss of death right there. So, and that's what makes it fun. It's one of the reasons I stay in the industry is because it's fun. I mean, because I enjoy the challenge of trying to help folks get to that point where they start to see some value and it's like, I get it, or, hey, this is fantastic.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Because you're right, it is just that peak time, that things go on allocation or whatever it might be, or the slowdown. But then it's also managing if you have a bunch of storage, correct? Because then you're not getting stuck with higher price fuel or vice versa. Yeah, good point. All right, so how about long-term strategy and advice? So like building during stability. When the supply chain feels calm, what proactive steps should propane companies take to get ahead of the next big supply challenge?
From a supply point of view, you should always be looking 2 to 3 years out. Okay. And that you have your immediate concerns, your immediate demands of, the coming winter, or if you're in winter, this winter. From a retailer's point of view, you don't want to look at just the next 2 or 3 weeks. Granted, we just talked about peak demand and peak January or peak February. Okay. At that point in time, you're not looking 12, 24, 36 months out. You're looking at, am I going to get 5 hours of sleep tonight? And do I have a load of propane tomorrow to put in a bobtail? I get that. But once that passes and you have a chance to breathe, you always want to be looking 2 to 3 years out, because that's where your opportunities are going to present yourself to have your supply match up with your marketing plans to your customer base. And one of the things over the years of Propane Resources that we've done, and we've done it very well, is we've helped retailers recognize that some of the best benefit they can give their customer base, and especially in volatile times or times where the market creates the opportunity, is go out and sell to those customers 2 years out. Don't fixate on selling to them through next March of 2026. Say, you know what? Based on what we're seeing right now, and this is what I would be telling them right now. Based on what we're seeing right now, based on where crude oil is, based on where natural gas pricing is, based on what we see happening with crude oil production, natural gas production heading our way into 2026, based on the potential that the U.S. economy kind of comes out of whatever funk we may or may not be in right now, it starts to grow in 2026. This could be a great opportunity for a retailer to go out and start marketing to their customer base for 26, 27. Because as we get into spring, summer of 26, crude oil may be trading at $80, $85 a barrel. Don't know. It could be trading at $50 a barrel. We don't know. But what we do know is right here, right now, those prices for next winter are very similar to the prices that we've seen for this winter in the propane world. So the winter prices of 26, 27 are similar to what we're seeing in 25, 26. So boy, what a gift you could give a customer if you're a retailer and say, I promise you, your price isn't going to go higher than this through March of 27. Okay. So what have we all been experiencing for the past 3 or 4 years? Every time you go to the store, anything you buy is more expensive. So now you've been able to go to your customer base with a strong marketing plan and you tell them, look, the one thing I can't tell you is your propane's not going to be higher than this. So that's what I'm always telling retailers, always look further than this winter. This winter right now, folks that need to still get things lined up for their customer base, this is making sure you make budget right now, 25, 26. Just make sure you hit your budget on whatever you've sold. 26 and beyond that's your opportunity to be fair and give your customer a great value, but also create opportunity for you to add some gross margin dollars to the bottom line, some net income. So
Very good.
supply is a multi-year look. It isn't a load of propane tomorrow. That's part of it. But that a true supply plan, a great supply plan is you're looking multi-years out. You're looking as far out as you can in front of you.
Very good. How about technology synergy? So how can propane companies better integrate tools like demand forecasting or smart analytics to tighten supply planning and reduce headaches?
You know, I tell you, the thing that probably more than anything has helped, and it's really started coming up to speed here in the past couple of years, is the use of the smartphone. You can do just about anything off of your phone now. And, you know, you guys know this as well as I do. You know, a lot of these retailers, you know, they've been in the business 30, 40, 50 years. Okay. The best you're going to get is them looking at an email. And, you know, but the beauty of it is because of the smartphone, you can send them the email and you can say, this is where the market is. We need to do something because it's making its move up. I think, you know, talking for all the folks that I say, you know, the young kids aren't coming in, the young kids that are coming in, I think are going to revolutionize the industry. I think because these are the kids that have seen mom and dad run it, and they're going to take what mom and dad did and take it to a whole nother level because they're going to use laptops. They're going to use mobile devices. They're going to use spreadsheets. They're going to use Excel models. They're going to use Power BBI. They're going to use Salesforce or some cloud-based software. And so they're going to take a lot of the paperwork, a lot of the moving one thing from here to here, and they're going to automate it because they're going to look at it like, I don't have time for this. And hopefully through that process of them doing that, they recognize where they need to focus their time on is selling propane to their customer base and expanding their customer base. That's the hope. That's the goal. But, you know, supply is the fund end of the business, or at least a lot of people think so. You know, you're buying and selling propane and you're doing this and you're doing that. And boy, I picked up a dime here. Or, oh boy, you know, I saved a half a cent on a load of propane. Are you kidding me? You're worrying about a penny? Go get that new customer. That new customer is going to bring $2,500, $3,000 worth of value to your customer or to your business. That's where your focus is. Don't worry about the penny in supply. Yeah, you don't want to get ripped off or you don't want to get hammered on the supply side. Don't focus on that though. Focus on building that customer base. That's where your growth is because the value of your business is going to come from how big's your customer base? How you growing it? Are you hitting your budgeted gross margins, which a good supply person will help you walk through to make sure you're hitting your budgeted gross margins because now you're bringing in the supply wholesale piece into that equation. Then you can go to your banker and you can say, hey, this is what I look like. This is my model. These are my efficiencies. This is my growth. And that banker's going to say, you know what, Jeff, I'm willing to give you a line of credit for $300,000 to help you grow it. Okay. They're not going to give you a line of credit because you saved a penny on a gallon of propane and supply. They're going to say, congratulations. The value and the growth of the business is going to be growing that customer base. That's the value. And supply's role in that is to support that marketing plan for you to grow that customer base. Supply is not the end. You need it because otherwise, what are you selling? But that's not the end. Marketing is the end. Supply feeds marketing.
Good.
That's
I
great
like it.
explanation.
Brian?
So I just have a few more questions for you. So what makes up a strong supply partner? Like if you had to narrow it down to 3 or 4 attributes, I'm an independent, I'm trying to find a new supplier. What do I need to look for?
Capacity to get you propane when you need it. And what that means is you want to work with suppliers that have access to multiple terminals, multiple locations, have great relationship with transportation companies that you may not have because, we talked about in wintertime, your transportation company may not be able to keep up. So that means you may have to go somewhere outside of your area to get a load of propane. And, we've all been in the business long enough to know there's been times like that, I've run stuff from Missouri to Indiana, Ohio before. Okay. I've run stuff out of the Gulf Coast up into, Ohio Valley before. So you want a supplier that has those relationships with multiple traders, multiple counterparties, and multiple transportation companies. So you may have to go short fill, but at least they can get you a load from 3 states over. Versus telling you, hey, you need to get it. I can get it to you 3 days from now. That doesn't help me. I need it tomorrow or I need it in 2 days because I'm running out. So that's probably one of the most critical pieces. Somebody, I will tell you, from my point of view, but I have a biased point of view, but a good supplier is somebody who understands how you're trying to sell to your customers. That's critical as well. If you're a retailer that's, cost plus margin, that's a pretty simple deal. If you're a retailer who's trying to grow his business or she's trying to grow her business and does budget plans and price caps and all of those types of things, your supplier, multiple suppliers, if you're large enough, need to understand how you're trying to sell to your customer base. And they don't necessarily need to know what your budgeted gross margin is, okay? Because that's your business as a retailer. That's not anybody else's business. But they need to understand how you're trying to sell it because that changes how you do things. Because it gets back to, you said, I want to save a penny a gallon. It may be in your best benefit as a retailer to actually pay 2 or 3 cents more or 5 cents more per gallon on a supply plan because you're going to get that supply than to call up every day trying to find a penny a gallon savings on a load of propane. And the supplier who understands that can build a model and say, Jeff, you know what? This is going to cost you 2 or 3 cents more, but we know we have it when we need it. And so those are the things I would look for if I was a retailer. Strong transportation relationships, or at least can get you in touch with transportation companies to try and help you get propane when you need it if your transportation company can't work. A supplier that understands how you're trying to market to your customer and can help build a supply plan that models that marketing plan are probably the critical pieces to it. And a supplier that answers his phone,
Yeah, that's an important part of the equation.
You kind of chuckle, but it's true. There's folks, and we know, and it's not just the propane industry, it's everywhere. They'll promise you the moon. And then when it hits, it doesn't happen.
Right.
So, and it's relationships. You guys know as well as I do. It's all relationships. Always has been, always will be.
Yeah. Just to follow up on the point that you were making, this industry is about personal relationships. You can go online and find pricing wherever you want to find pricing from. But from my perspective, the service that you guys bring, it's not about pricing and gallons delivered. You're a partner for the companies that you're working with. You're more about providing service than you are about providing just a specific price on a load, right? And that's something that is an industry, your point earlier, like we all work together, and the locations that are able to roll in a good supply plan with a great ability to go reach out and find other supply points and other supply partners and other delivery options and present that to your customer, right? Hey, here's some other options for you. I think that's a winning solution for sure. One other point that I would like to make about something you were talking about before with the hardship that we have in finding drivers, not only bobtail drivers, service drivers, transport drivers. As an industry, we do not do a good job about telling people this career field is not going away. You cannot replace a driver with an AI computer. He won't know how to pre-trip a truck. He can't leak test in a device. So yes, there will be some changes because of advancements in technology. Yes, there will be improvements in logistics, back office. But the actual industry is still very physical, right? You still have to have a person to complete those tasks. And I think that's an area that we struggle with as an industry of getting that message out there. And like I say as many times as I can, Microsoft just announced they're going to eliminate most of their coding, right? That's all going to be done via IA or AI online, right? You can't AI your way to making a delivery or taking care of a customer. You can't do it.
Well, think at least through the remainder of my career and probably for decades to come, I don't think you're going to have that ability to do that. Could it be 50 years from now that bobtails are automated? Possibly. I would tell you probably not, because
Right.
you're dealing with something that is very sensitive, and you want to make sure you do it right. And we've had this discussion for ages in the office: is how do we convince young folks this is a great job? You're going to work, you're going to sweat, but it's rewarding and it's great and it's fun and it's not going away. You look at and when times get tough, and I hope they don't, I hope things stay, great and wonderful and rosy, and the economy just continues to grow and grow and grow. But like all things in life, there's cycles. Well, we're going to cycle into probably some type of contraction in the economy, but the propane world doesn't contract.
Right.
Okay. You may not buy your Netflix service. Sorry, Netflix, if you're listening, but you know what you're going to have? You're going to have hot water and you're going to cook. Okay. And those aren't ever going to go away. We're not a luxury. We're a necessity. And so the opportunities for these kids, in their 20s, I've joked with folks. If somebody told me, cause I went to college, I got an accounting degree, all that stuff. But if somebody told me at 21, 22 that I can make a very, very good income, hauling 9,000, 10,000 gallons of propane, I'd be like, sign me up. And what I did was, I sat in a blue cube and moved numbers from one spreadsheet cell to another spreadsheet cell. But I haven't figured out how we can convince these kids this is a great career. And I don't know what the answer is. I wish I knew it, because boy, I'd build a business around getting 20 somethings to come into the propane industry.
Yeah. I just think as an industry, we have to continue to sell that message every time we get a chance. Right. So, if you think back, I graduated high school in the 80s, right? So if you think back, we used to have shop auto, we had woodworking classes that we had to take, and those have gone by the wayside, and it's all been focused more on technology. Well, now as technology is going away, that emphasis has to shift back to be able to provide people opportunities, right? An
That's right.
equitable opportunity for future growth in an industry that's going to be around for another 100 years, right? That's an important point that we as an industry have to tell every time we get out in front of people.
I mean, realistically, my career is going to go away. Okay. The accounting industry, in some form or fashion, is going to go through a dramatic change over the next 5 to 10 years. All of it's going to be automated. You may have somebody who oversees it, who has, a degree or some type of expertise in, is this an asset or is this a liability? And they may look at the output from the machine, but the machine's going to do the accounting. Okay. So then you ask yourself, but is a machine going to pull that hose to that 500-gallon tank on the side of a house? No. Is that machine going to go out and be able to go out at 3 a.m. when, that 80-year-old lady, thinks she smells propane? No. And that's, boy, I wish there was a way we could figure out how to tell these kids this is the future. Which is ironic because, we've been told for the past 30 years, the future is, computers and technology and all that. Well, right. I think the future's people working like in the propane industry. I think that is the future, because everything I do in the office is going to be automated.
So to follow up on your automation point, do you see where companies will have an integrated supply plan with their routing and scheduling and delivery plan, right? So they are forecasting, hey, we've got X number of deliveries. It will automatically bring in or schedule loads according to what your projected demand is over the next 4 to 6 weeks?
Oh, we'll get there. It just, it gets back to, I think that with it being such a small market cap industry, the big boys can't and won't spend the time to build it. It's going to be somebody who maybe has a feel for the industry, has been in the industry, and is willing to take the time and investment to build that. Absolutely. There's going to come a day where that whole supply transportation logistic piece is going to be integrated into one piece. But this gets back to the human factor. That's going to work 90% of the time. But then come January, when the wheels come off, it's not going to work. So you better have somebody who understands the industry and understands the business and understands the relationship to be able to say, you know what, I'm calling my buddy over in, pick the state, Iowa, to bring a load over to you because the system thinks it's done its job because, well, yeah, I got this terminal set up. I've got these 5 loads set up. I got the transportation set up, all the reporting is going to be automated and the bill of ladings are just going to show up on your smart tablet or your smartphone. Great. Well, you have more demand than I expected. Now what do I do? Mm-hmm. And that's where the human factor is going to have to still be in the business. But the benefit of that, and it gets back to what we talked about earlier, the benefit of that is because of that automation, 90% of the time it works. What that does is it frees up the opportunity and capacity for a supplier or a business to talk to that retailer about how do you want to grow your business? How do you want to market to your customers? So instead of me sitting there talking and saying, okay, we've got a price from terminal A at this, terminal B this, terminal C this, I could sit there and say, well, how do you want to sell to your customers? Well, I haven't really thought about that, Jeff. Well, let's think about it. Do you want to do a price cap? Well, Jeff, how does a price cap work? Price will never be above X, but it could move down if the market moves down. And so I don't look at that scenario as necessarily a bad thing. It creates opportunities for humans to talk to humans and grow a retail business. Because to fully automate it, I don't think you can ever get there. Because one bad winter, and when the system doesn't deliver, everybody's going to be frustrated and angry.
So if you were asked by a marketer, what is the one thing that I have to do right now to make sure that my supply plan or my propane was secured for the winter, what would that be?
To your suppliers on a regular basis, making sure you understand where their supply is coming from, what their supply schedule looks like. That would be it. Continuing communication with your suppliers is probably about the only thing you can do that you would actually have some control over. So just keep talking to them.
I have one last question for you, and this is a looking ahead. It's kind of a two-parter. What do you see as the biggest risk or reward going 2026 and forward?
The biggest reward is that what I think happens. I think we could see this situation where crude oil makes a move back up into the $80, $85, $90 market. Propane trades off the crude curve. Mm-hmm. So I think you could see 26 and beyond prices start to move higher. Your reward now is if you're starting to build that supply plan now for those future years, you've created opportunity to capture some additional gross margin. The risk is that, and this is the risk I think that we're seeing kind of playing out in the market right now. And one of the reasons why you're not seeing what I think is going to happen play out is we're just not really sure that this economy is going to do what everybody says it's going to do. And, it used to be when I started in the industry, and you guys can probably relate and laugh, it was about inventories and are we going to have weather? Okay. Mm-hmm. I still look at that stuff, but now I'm looking at the yield curves on treasuries. I'm looking at foreign exchange. I'm looking at the price of copper. I'm looking at all these other factors and all these other variables because they can be indicators or leading indicators of where the economy's going. And although we're very recession proof, we're also an industry where you could see pullbacks of consumption. Well, we see that on the crude side for sure. We see that in motor gasoline. When the economy is not doing as well, people don't spend as much money. So the risk would be that crude comes off and we see crude go to $45, $50 a barrel. And instead of trading that 75 cents right now. Next winter, 26, 27, we're trading at 65 cents or 60 cents. Okay. Well, that's not your knockout punch. 10 or 15 cents to the downsides. Wholesale is not your knockout punch. But what could be your knockout punch is if you're not thinking 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, and we get into next summer, next fall, crude's at $85 a barrel, $85 a barrel. Propane's trading at 95 cents. I think there's more reward to the upside than risk to the downside overall.
Okay.
But the risk would be is that the market comes off because the economies of the world slow down. That would be the risk right now out there.
Okay. Great. I love those explanations. So what questions or what thoughts do you have about maybe what we haven't talked about today? Is there anything that we've not discussed that you're like, hey, we really should touch on that?
Really the only thing that was kind of floating in the back of my mind is that, and this gets back to what we just talked about on the risk reward, is that crude oil production in the U.S. is plateauing. The rig count's coming off. It looks like it's going to continue to come off. Talking about things you look at, I used to look at inventory. Now I'm looking at unemployment numbers in the state of Texas. Why do I look at unemployment numbers in the state of Texas? Because there's a whole lot of people digging holes in the ground looking for crude oil or natural gas in the state of Texas. Well, all the exploration and production companies are cutting back. So anybody who expects or anticipates that we're going to continue to see crude oil production increase going forward in the United States, I don't want to say they're kidding themselves. They could be right. There could be a technology maybe out there that we don't know about, and some of that could be that, they do more horizontal drilling off of one well, and go further and further out to the shale. But when I look at it, I think we're going to start to see crude oil production in the U.S. come off, which only really sets the stage for crude oil prices to move up going forward. And because where propane is traded and how it's traded, and I can make arguments all day long, but nobody will listen to me. With 80% of our propane coming out of natural gas, I can make an argument we should really be trading off of a natural gas curve. Okay. The counter would be, but the rest of the world trades propane off of Brent. We trade it off of WTI. The 80-20 split we see here in the U.S. isn't necessarily true around the rest of the world for propane. So it's going to continue to trade off of crude oil because that's what the traders can trade off of, because that's a future curve. That's an active curve and it's always trading. And so they're going to trade it off of crude oil. So you're setting the stage in 26 and beyond. The crude oil prices could go up. Propane, unless we just have an overabundance of propane, and we're probably not going to have an overabundance of propane going into 26. We're going to be okay. We're probably going to go into wintertime at 100 million. We have an average winter. We'll come out of winter 45, 50 million, type of number going into next build season. But with that crude production coming off, you could see crude prices start to firm. You're going to see propane probably follow it up. And so I think people need to keep an eye on where crude oil production is in the U.S. and where it's going. And it doesn't look favorable for it to continue to move higher, at least in the near future. I mean, in the next 6 months, 12 months.
Okay. Well, listen, I think it's been a great conversation today. Justin, Jackie, do you guys have any more questions for Jeff?
No, I don't think so. It has been great. Jeff, thank you so much for coming on our show. And
thank you.
Nice to meet you.
I enjoyed it.
Jeff, I appreciate it. This has been really interesting. You brought up some really good points. I'm sitting here listening to half while I'm thinking of the other. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again, Jeff. It was nice to have you on our show. Brian, is there anything else?
No, I really appreciate the conversation. I thought that there were some really great points talking about not focusing on today, but let's worry about tomorrow. Today's going to kind of take care of itself. And I think that's a message that should resonate with a lot of people.
All right. All right. Well, thanks again. We'll see you guys next time.